Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Brad Formsma, who is the author of the best-selling book, I Like Giving, The Transforming Power of a Generous Life. And I really am looking forward to this interview. So Brad, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
So I want to dive into the concepts, but I always like to see what led someone up to that book topic or that business focus that they're in. So generosity and teaching people how to live generously. How did that? It probably, if I'm kind of surmising correctly, probably was a thread in your life and your business, and then it started getting more and more amplified, and then you started kind of seeing that cause come to life. But give us a little bit of that background and what led you to write this book.
Oh, sure. Well, I think we go back just a little bit, if I could, Mike. I was 11 years old, and my grandfather had a commercial bakery, and he would pick me up on Saturday mornings, and we would go into his test kitchen and make 16 special loaves of bread. And what would happen is those loaves of bread would cool off and go into the trunk of his car, and we would go to perhaps a widow from his church, and she'd get a few loaves of bread, and he would be generous with his words, affirming to her and kind. And so he was modeling generosity of words, and perhaps the next stop would be 2 more loaves of bread, and this time a white envelope, and he was modeling generosity of money, and so on and so forth. Like even throughout that morning, I remember a few more loaves of bread at another stop and a letter of recommendation, helping someone through him being generous with his influence. And so he began to kind of frame up what I call 7 ways to living generously. And those are discussed in the book, and I regularly speak about them in churches across America and in, leading businesses. Because what we find is that those 7 ways of being generous, which are generous of thought, generous with words, generous with money, generous with influence, generous with time, and then generous with attention, and generous in the way we share our stuff. And you take those 7 ways and you start to see how they just weave through the daily, weekly, monthly rhythms of one's life. But then, Mike, I kind of fast forward. I ended up going into business, not into my grandpa's. I started my own. I'm kind of what I would describe as entrepreneurial spirit. Life passion is giving. Those would be my 6 words that kind of describe a little bit about me. And I had a business for nearly 20 years. And frankly, I was minding my own business. And one day on a run, I got an impression that very clearly had to do with God getting ready to move my cheese, if you will.
Yeah, I remember that. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's I'll never forget it. On a run in Ada, Michigan, back when we lived in the great state of Michigan. I got this impression: I'm going to use you to encourage people in their giving, and you'll help inspire people to be generous, and you'll influence influencers with the message that it's better to give than receive. And I didn't really know what to do with that, Mike. I didn't even hardly leave for spring vacation because of the business that I had. But that really moved us then to starting the organization I Like Giving. As we started to gather people to talk about generosity, we found that stories connected with some scripture were a powerful way to move someone from awareness to action. And the result of that would be some incredible impact and kind of a miracle in that story. I often say when we give, a miracle starting to happen because somebody probably was praying that God would provide or something like that. So anyway, that's how we started the organization I Like Giving, with the sole vision to, hey, we're going to inspire people to live generously.
Yeah. I find it really interesting how sometimes people find this nugget of truth, and that becomes their next TEDx talk or the next wave in personal development circles that we see. But in reality, it was talked about in the 20s or 30s, or in reality, like what you were just talking about in stories. Stories have been around for ages. Christ used parables to not sell concepts and beat someone over the head, but to bring a concept to life and make people kind of go, oh, yeah, that does make sense. If you had just told me that fact, maybe it would not have resonated well. But I just think that it's so neat to see that, there's truly, like Ecclesiastes says, nothing new under the sun. And we feel like storytelling is so new and cutting edge, but yeah, it's been around for a minute or two.
For sure. I just got back from Israel. I had the opportunity to teach in Capernaum, and of course, that's where Peter's house was, and where Jesus was kind of his hometown for a couple years, I believe, of his ministry, and so he was teaching around there, and so that was a super wonderful thing to be able to talk about biblical generosity in a place where undoubtedly the Lord did. And yet, as time has gone on, I've always felt that the clear calling for our work would be one track into the marketplace, one track into the church. And part of it just makes sense, right? There's 2 days on the weekend where we could serve a local church. We're probably in 23 to 25 churches a year, and that's enough because I'd like to have my own home church as well. And my wife really appreciates that, by the way. She doesn't really like to go to church alone. So there's also those 5 days in the week that we can be in the marketplace. I often say not everybody goes to church, but most people go to work. And when you can appropriately talk about generosity principles that, for me, tie into their basis from the Bible in a marketplace environment, not only are they great for people who work at those companies who are already of a faith perspective, it's a powerful way for them to be able to express their faith with coworkers and have a jump-off point. So that's what we do today.
Neat. And, I know that, like you just said, it doesn't have to be a faith-based church organization or ministry. These principles of giving and generosity, love, all of that ties into just good business principles. And I also like the fact that you're not talking about giving as only money. That was just one of your 7. So let's touch on a couple of the others where, so many times we just feel like one of the ones you mentioned was time and attention. We're busy, to try to cram in one extra thing in the day sometimes is, tipping the scales. So the fact that someone can give of or provide attention and time is a pretty big undertaking, and it really does make a good impact. So what do you teach around that concept?
Well, the idea of being generous with attention, honestly, Mike, I kind of wish I wouldn't have put that one in there. It's the hardest one I'm fighting with right now. And I think it's because I carry around a cell phone, 6 ounces of glass, plastic, and technology. And it's the anti-generosity attention device. It takes our attention. In fact, the other night I took my wife out for a nice dinner date. This was going great. And I looked around the room and I said to her, "Can you believe all of the people that have gone out to dinner with their cell phones?"
Yeah.
And she said, "Like you?"
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, my word, I didn't even see it. I'm so close to it. And fortunately, in that moment, many times I've not responded the best with that kind of correction. She did it in love. She did it smiling. You can't see that over the radio waves. But what happens is we have created habits, and we get kind of a, hormone rush without getting overly technical when we get activated by looking at our device. And, oh, someone wants me. Oh, there's something shiny and bright colors, and oh, I'm needed, and oh, somebody wants me to connect with them. And even though you're sitting with someone right in front of you, it's horrible. So I don't say that in judgment to other people. I just say, now that I told that story, I didn't even tell you to get off your phones at a restaurant, but I suspect the next time you're at a restaurant and you hold up your phone, you'll remember this story and that searing word from my wife. So I think that's one area. But I'll take you back to another story of a generosity of attention. I don't know if I'll ever forget this. Had the privilege of being at Southwest Airlines headquarters and was meeting with Herb Kelleher, who is their founder. And I don't know of a business leader and founder who took biblical principles and applied them to his business. While I'm not exactly sure where he actually came from a faith perspective, we never talked about those kinds of things, but he built a company on the golden rule. He built a company on people being respectful of each other and love, right? Their stock symbols, love. And I walked into his office. He's sitting behind his desk. He's smoking a cigarette. There's another one in the ashtray. He had smoked forever. And he would say funny things like, I just love the smell of smoke. The guy's crazy. Anyway, he jumps up. I'm 6'4". I think he was 6'4". He comes around his desk and gives you this great big bear hug. I can hear the cigarette crackling over my shoulder.
Oh, no.
And he looks right at my eyes. And he says, now, where are you originally from? And between puffs of the cigarette, he was giving me 100% of his attention. And I'm like, this guy's got 45,000 employees. He's a multi-billionaire. And he is all here. And we ended up in this great conversation. He would make it about you. He immediately went to, okay, now where do you live today? Right? And he was looking to connect. And then, of course, he was funny. So he said, now, you lived in Michigan early on. You said, that means you're familiar with that airline, former airline, Northwest Airlines. And I'm like, yeah, I remember them. I scraped them off my shoe, Herb, once I got, connected to Southwest. And he takes a big hit off of his cigarette and he says, they thought they could compete with us by just buying aircraft. They forgot it was about the people.
Yeah.
Now, about this moment, Mike, his assistant's knocking on the door. Herb, you got a conference call. And he had some colorful four-letter words that we won't use, but he just said, I'm not doing it. I'm here with my new friend, Brad. Mm-hmm. And then he said, I want to get my picture with you. He says it to me. I'm going to get a picture with you. But I just got my hair cut. I come in here. They check my blood pressure. Of course I don't have good blood pressure. I'm 86 years old, and I've been smoking for 50 years. What do you expect? And then he runs down the hallway and combs his hair and comes back. How do I look? Then we take a picture. He gave me, in a matter of moments, 100% of his attention. And you don't forget it.
Yeah.
And so I think we have an opportunity to give that and be fully present.
And I would say, as impactful as that story is for a leader in business today, to go, okay, I can do that, but it does not have to be every single interaction with every employee every single day. It could be consistently where you just watch for opportunities. So I feel like some people might be hearing this and going, well, I can't do that every single time someone comes to my office. And I know that you're not saying to do that, but how do you find balance there?
Yeah, so real simple. I will quote Colleen Barrett from Southwest, who was also with us. She was the president for years. She says, I do what I want to do for 50,000. See, if somebody comes up to you in your organization and says, hey, I got this idea, whatever, and you're pressed for time, you're walking through the hallway, you're getting in the elevator, it's as simple as this. Hey, Joe, it sounds like that's a really good idea. I want to give it my full attention. Can you circle back with me tomorrow and we can take 3 to 5 minutes to process that? And then you can move on. And people also have to understand, what is their expectation? The point is this. You invest in giving your attention, you will reap getting attention.
Yes. Where your focus is, there is, there's what's going to manifest, because that is where you are paying the most attention. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I spoke at a company called Do It Best. Maybe your audience would recall, they have these different hardware stores all over the nation, and I had talked about being generous with words at work through not hitting send on an email or affirming someone with a specific connection to what they had done. And the powerful thing is that generosity of words, you start to, that affects your heart. You take that home. And I got a report back a week later. This guy was like, my wife keeps asking me, why am I being nicer to her with my words? What's going on at work? And he said, this guy was in and he just explained how we could, build people up, or, words mattered. And so that's another way. You had asked me about attention and words. So I think that is, I think that puts me in a lot of different corporate settings where people want me to help them reinforce the vision that's already there in the company.
Yeah, neat. I was thinking when you were talking a minute ago about, I always like to look at the other side of the equation, and we're talking about being generous, and I wonder if there's another side which kind of makes this kind of equation work, which is being willing to receive and being thankful. So the person that you're being generous to, for this to actually have a flow to work, that person has to be in the mindset and the mode and the spirit of receiving, because you know how some people can't even take a compliment. So what do you find when someone tries to be generous, giving, time, money, attention, all these things that we're talking about, but then maybe that other party isn't really as receiving as they could be? How can that part of the equation work?
Well, if they work for me over time, if there's not change, they're just going to have to find another place to give their life away. I mean, it sounds like a cultural issue on one hand. But the other thing I would explain is one day I was picking up my dry cleaning with my daughter. It was hot. The air conditioner wasn't working at this at the dry cleaner. And there was 3 people back, Mr. Arms Crossed. You can tell he was hot, but it wasn't the temperature. It was just his attitude. Things weren't moving fast enough. And I had over the years gotten to know the lady, Rosa, and so I just said, hey, Rosa, how many people are working here? And I had my 10-year-old with me. And she said, there's 4 of us today. And so we walked out, and my daughter says to me, I know what you're going to do. We're going over to Chipotle next door and getting them some iced teas, aren't we? And I said, of course, 100%. We had our antenna working. We saw that. So we came back in, now Mr. Arms Crossed. We came back in with the iced teas. Mr. Arms Crossed is next in line. We put the iced teas on the counter. Rosa smiles. The people in the back are smiling and waving. And his hands fall to the side. He leans forward. He even smiles. You see, what happens is over time, when we give and live generously, it impacts people. The way we were created, this is biologically speaking, when you give, when you receive, and when you observe, your body produces dopamine, oxytocin. You feel better. You get in connection with it. It's just how God set it up. I'm just saying. And so as we go out and give, does everybody receive well? No. I actually have a chapter about that in my book, because receiving is very hard in this independent American culture. However, over time, you can't fight the forces of what's happening in your wiring.
Yeah. It makes me also think of something. We're talking about so many deep things here. Here's something that I find when we start thinking about, giving and generosity, and like Bob Berg talks about in the book Go Giver, this is a new philosophy for so many people. They might think they've heard it before, but they haven't really, internalized it and implemented it. But I feel that there's people that might say, I can implement this in my personal life, my business life, but what's in it for me? What's the give back? And how do you get people to get past the feeling of, well, if I do this, then I should get whatever, fill in the blank?
I just don't subscribe to the give to get. I can't find it anywhere.
Yeah,
I can't
but it's human nature.
Buy in. It's human nature until you cross over and realize the truth that you reap what you sow. And I think if we're going to be talking about Jesus of Nazareth, we have to understand his message had a lot to do with what is your motive for doing what you do. And so I think, this all comes back to the heart issue, right? So it's the heart issue is why would I think in terms of give to get? Of course, there's some people who would say, oh, well, you have to understand, the Bible says in Luke, give and it should be given, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. Well, yeah, I often think God brings it back. My grandpa, who he started this conversation with, would say, behind the big plume of cigar smoke, Bradley, giving is good, and God often brings it back so you can do it again. And I think that's more of the mindset. As you begin to live generously and are outwardly focused, you're going to see you're going to change. The Brad of 10, 15, 20 years ago is very different than the Brad of today. This isn't once and done, and I didn't transform in 1 hour on this, and I continue to grow in it, right? The Bible says, grow in the grace of giving, not grown, you're done, it's over. And so I think it's a perpetual process and journey.
Yeah. Yeah, and the old cliche, journey of 1,000 steps or 1,000 miles begins with the first step, and how do you eat an elephant, all of that. And I think that a lot of people see this big picture of that feeling of giving, generosity, gratitude, and kind of that changing of mindset. It doesn't have to happen overnight because you are in the condition you're in now of maybe not following these principles, but you don't need to change and be perfect tomorrow morning. It needs to be that gradual progression. So I like that point that you made. So let's wrap up with what's the best way that people can reach out, learn more, pick up a copy of your book, pick up a copy of your course, and how could that connection be made?
Well, ilikegiving.com is a great place to start, and bradformsma.com is where you'll see information on my upcoming podcast starting in 2020. And you never know, Mike. Maybe I'll be at your church in Denver. We're not too far away.
Neat,
and,
awesome.
So I think those would be the ways that you could connect with us. Of course, we're on Insta and Twitter, other social channels as well.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.